I used to think I was just the stronger child, the one who was supposed to handle everything on my own. That belief lasted until the day my grandmother stood up in the middle of my younger sister's lavish graduation party, in front of more than 150 guests, and exposed the truth. For years my family hadn't just favored her, they had stolen my future. I grew up in a house where everything was always called fair, but it never felt that way to me. When I was 12, I came home with a straight-A report card full of excitement, thinking maybe this time my mom would hug me and my dad would look at me with pride for just a little longer. But my mother only glanced at the paper while folding laundry and said one sentence, "Good job, I knew you could do it." That was it. No celebratory dinner, no bright smile, not even a hug. A week later, Madison got a B+ in math, and the whole family went out to her favorite restaurant to celebrate as if she had just won a gold medal. I still remember the sound of my father laughing the way he patted Madison on the head and told her he was proud of how hard she had worked. I sat across from them, pushing my noodles around my plate, unable to understand why the things I did well were treated as expected, while my sister's smaller efforts were always lit up like some huge victory. Back then, I didn't have the words for what I was feeling. I only knew that I felt invisible in my own family. And as the years went on, that feeling became clearer. I was not the child people paid attention to, not the one they supported. I was the fine one, and in my family being fine meant no one had to care. By the time I was 16, I understood the unspoken rule in my family. The weaker one got help while the stronger one was left on their own. Madison struggled in school, so my parents hired a tutor. Madison got overwhelmed with her college applications, so they paid for a consultant to guide her through every step. As for me, I studied by myself, searched for scholarships at the library on my own, and spent hours reading every line of every instruction because I knew no one would be sitting beside me. My 16th birthday came with no special gift, no car keys, just a serious talk about responsibility, saving money, and how I needed to be more mature. 2 years earlier, Madison had gotten an old Honda for her birthday. I once asked why everything was so different between us. My mother looked at me calmly and said, "Madison needs more support. You're more mature, you understand that." And she was right. I did understand. I understood that in their eyes, my ability to take care of myself was not something to admire, it was the perfect excuse for them to do nothing for me. Aunt Helen was the only one who saw it clearly. One Thanksgiving, she told my father outright that he was taking advantage of my independence, that I was sinking while no one was even throwing me a life preserver. My father just shrugged and said I was doing fine. I heard every word. I didn't cry, argue, or react. But deep inside, a quiet belief began to form: if I was strong, I would be invisible. And one day, I would pay a very high price for that invisibility. When I was 18, with only 3 months left before high school graduation, I thought my life was finally about to open up in the way I had always hoped. I had been accepted to a state university with a partial scholarship. It covered tuition, but not housing, books, or the rest of the expenses. I still believed I had a college fund, the one my grandparents had set aside for both my sister and me years ago. Ever since I was little, I had heard my father say that my grandparents wanted to make sure both of their granddaughters had a real chance at a good education. So that day I sat down at the kitchen table with my acceptance letter, feeling nervous but hopeful. I thought we were only going to talk about logistics, but the look my parents exchanged made my stomach turn cold before either of them said a word. My mother spoke first, avoiding my eyes, and said they needed to talk about that fund. Then my father took over and explained that Madison would need more support because her grades were not as strong as mine, and that she needed the entire amount in order to have an equal opportunity. At first, I could barely understand what they were saying. Then every word began sinking in like nails. The entire amount. For Madison. I asked again because I thought I must have heard them wrong, but no, they were completely serious. They called it the best decision for the family. They called my share family money. And just like that, I, the one whose name was clearly attached to that fund, was stripped of everything that was supposed to be mine by a few cold sentences at the same kitchen table I had known all my life. I still remember the shock of asking them, "So I get nothing?" In response, my mother stood up as if she were ready to end the conversation and said the sentence I would never forget for years afterward. "You'll be fine on your own. You always are." Those words felt like a sentence being handed down. No explanation, no guilt, no promise to make it up to me later. Just the calm certainty of people who believed they had every right to take away my future because I could handle it. That night I didn't argue. I didn't slam doors. I didn't collapse on the floor, crying like a heartbroken child. I simply went to my room, closed the door, sat down in front of my computer, and typed the words military education benefits. I remember the pale blue light from the screen on my face in that dark room. Something inside me felt numb and yet strangely clear. I realized then that I could no longer wait for someone to save me. If the normal path to college had been taken away, I would have to find another road. Not because I had always wanted to serve in the military, but because the only door I had ever believed was mine had just been slammed shut by my own parents. They did not just choose Madison. They taught me that my needs could always be sacrificed if it gave my sister another advantage. And that very night, the last soft, innocent part of me disappeared. I was no longer just a girl about to start college. I became someone who had no choice but to build a future from the wreckage her family had left behind. 3 months later, while Madison was posting college move-in photos from an expensive private school with captions like, "So grateful to have parents who always believed in me," I was in basic training, learning how to take apart and reassemble a rifle in a matter of seconds. No one had to point out the contrast. It hit me every rare time I was allowed to check my phone. My sister was choosing dorm curtains, desk decor, and dresses for sorority events. I was running until my lungs burned, learning to obey commands instantly, and training myself to swallow exhaustion without complaint. I kept telling myself not to be jealous that this was the path I had chosen. But deep down, I knew it was not really a choice. It was the only path left after my first one had been taken from me. In the hardest moments, I still thought about that money, that dorm room, those college years. I should have had the chance to live like everyone else. I did not hate Madison for being given an opportunity. What hurt was knowing that opportunity was never meant to belong only to her. I learned how to survive in a brutal environment, and little by little, I turned myself into someone who could endure anything. But even as I grew tougher, one wound inside me never fully closed, the feeling that my own family had always seen me as the one who could be sacrificed. If you have ever had to carry the part that should have been shared by someone else, comment 1, so I know you understand that feeling. Some kinds of pain look like strength from the outside, but only the person living through it knows that it is really just the only way to keep going. Throughout my years in the military, I watched Madison live the life I should have had at least some part in. She studied abroad in Barcelona, joined clubs, went to formal events, and graduated in photos that were always flooded with praise from my parents. Their Facebook was practically an album celebrating Madison, so proud of our daughter, she did it, the result of hard work. I sent them photos too. I sent one of me making it over an obstacle course, a message saying I had completed my first month of training, sometimes just a few short updates about my unit. The responses I got were usually so brief they felt cold. "That's good, take care of yourself." Sometimes there was no response at all. Their silence was no longer accidental. It was a repeated choice, made often enough that it became its own kind of truth. Aunt Helen was the only one who kept texting me regularly, asking real questions, remembering the name of my unit, even remembering small details I had mentioned before. She also told me that Grandma was always asking about me. That felt strange because Grandma had been fairly quiet ever since I enlisted. I assumed she was disappointed or simply did not understand why I had chosen that path. Looking back now, maybe her silence was not because she did not care, but because she already had doubts. I was still too young to understand at the time. As for me, I only knew how to keep moving forward. I learned how to live without expecting a warm phone call from family, without waiting for a care package, without hoping I would ever become the child they proudly showed off to the world. Of all those years, the person who left me the most unsettled was my grandmother. On one rare occasion, I called her from base, and her voice trembled slightly when she heard mine. She asked if I was really okay, asked in a way that made me feel like she was listening for something hidden beneath the words, "I'm fine." When I told her things were hard but I was managing, she went quiet for a long moment and then said something I would not understand until much later. "Being strong does not mean you have to be the one who loses out. Do you understand what I mean?" At the time, I gave her a vague answer and said yes. But the truth was, I did not understand. Not really. Before we hung up, she added that some things in our family were not the way I thought they were. There was something unusual in her voice, gentle but sharp at the same time, like she was hinting at something I still stood outside of. I ended the call feeling confused, but then I was swept back into the rhythm of military life and let her words drift away. Still, they never truly disappeared. They stayed in the back of my mind like a puzzle piece that did not fit yet, waiting for the day when everything else would finally make sense around it. At the same time, Madison kept living her bright, well-provided life, while I kept learning to accept that every time I managed to stand back up on my own, my family had one more reason to assume I did not need anyone. I thought I had gotten used to that, but in truth, acceptance was only a shell. Beneath it all, the questions that had never been answered kept growing in silence. 6 years later, I came home with my discharge papers in my bag, a large duffel over my shoulder, and enough savings to get by for 4 months. I had used my military benefits to finish my bachelor's degree online through the same state school I had once dreamed of attending. Except I never got the youth and freedom that Madison had enjoyed there. My first dinner back should have felt like a reunion, but instead it felt more like I was a stranger sitting at the wrong table. We had not even finished the appetizers before my mother excitedly announced that Madison was applying for MBA programs at top schools. For the next half hour, the whole conversation revolved around her GMAT score, her recommendation letters, and her ambitions. When there was finally a pause, I tried to mention that I was looking for project management jobs in logistics. My father gave a distracted nod, and my mother said the military must have been an interesting experience, in the same tone people use when they want to end a topic as quickly as possible. No one asked what I had been through. No one asked how hard it was to return to civilian life. No one even asked if I was okay. After dinner, I noticed the new furniture, the renovated bathroom, and the new car outside, a graduation gift for Madison the year before. They had money for all of that, but in 6 years they had never once sent me a single care package. Lying in my old bed that night, I realized something even more painful than being neglected. I had been gone for 6 years, and the truth was, no one had really missed me at all. 3 weeks after coming home, I found my way to a veterans support group, mostly because I did not know where else to go. That was where I met Jake Morrison. He was 2 years older than me, had served for 8 years, and carried that familiar look of someone trying to adjust to a world that no longer fit quite right. The very first time Jake saw me sitting stiffly on the edge of my chair and smiled, asking if it was my first meeting. I let out a small laugh. It was one of those rare moments when I felt truly seen without feeling judged. After that session, we started talking, then getting coffee, and before long, he became someone I could sit beside in silence without feeling uncomfortable. Jake understood the things I did not have to explain: the guilt of having made it home, the sense of not belonging in ordinary life, the strange feeling of being both stronger and more fragile than before. One evening, he asked me why I had enlisted. I had never told the full story to anyone, but with Jake, it all came spilling out: the college fund, the promise that was taken from me, the words "you'll be fine on your own," the 6 years of watching my sister live off the very future that should have belonged partly to me. Jake listened, without interrupting. Then he asked one question that stopped me cold. "Did you ever confirm it directly with your grandmother, that she actually agreed to give all that money away?" I went completely still. I realized I had never asked. I had simply accepted my parents' version as fact, because I was so used to believing they had the right to decide things for me. In that moment, something inside me began to shift. Maybe this was not just favoritism. Maybe there was something even bigger underneath it. A few weeks later, the family group chat exploded on a Tuesday morning. Madison announced that she had been accepted into Northwestern's MBA program. My mother replied almost immediately with a flood of proud messages, and my father chimed in saying, of course, the family would help cover the tuition. I stared at the screen and felt a cold heaviness spreading through my chest. Of course they would help Madison. They always had. I congratulated her sincerely, because getting into a program like that was no small achievement. But then my mother started talking about the $120,000 cost for 2 years, and my father called it an investment in Madison's future. I do not know why, but this time I could not swallow it down. I asked outright where that money was coming from when I was still paying off debts that should never have existed in the first place. The group went silent for a few seconds before my father replied that my military benefits had paid for my education while Madison needed a different kind of support. I reminded them that I had only attended a state school using benefits I earned through 6 years of service, while Madison had already been given both private college and now an MBA. My mother immediately accused me of being bitter, and Madison said I was ruining her moment and always creating drama. I read that message 3 times. The first time I felt angry. The second time I felt hurt. The third time I felt something snap into focus. I did not argue any further. I sealed that conversation in my mind as the final proof that if I stayed silent, this story would keep repeating itself forever. Right after that conversation, I called Aunt Helen. She sounded almost unsurprised when I told her I needed Grandma's number and wanted to know exactly how that college fund had been set up. She was quiet for a beat, then said, "So you're finally asking." That sentence hit me like a sting, but it also woke me up. That same evening, I called my grandmother. My hands were shaking so badly, as if simply pressing the numbers might blow up the entire past. But she picked up almost immediately, as though she had been waiting for that call for a very long time. When I asked whether she had ever truly agreed to let all the money be given to Madison because she needed it more, there was silence on the other end for a few seconds. Then her voice changed completely, no longer gentle like usual, but cold and firm. "That was a lie." I sat there, frozen. She told me plainly that she and my grandfather had created a trust with terms that could not have been clearer. $200, 000. For me, $200, 000. For Madison, each of us to receive our share at 18, and the money was to be used only for education. No negotiation? No flexibility? No possibility of one taking the other's share? It felt like the ground beneath me had tilted. Every excuse I had swallowed, every reason I had forced myself to accept on my parents' behalf shattered all at once. This was not just a case of them making a decision for me within the messy boundaries of family. If what Grandma said was true, then what they had done went far beyond favoritism. It meant they had deliberately taken something that was mine, and had spent years making me believe I had no right to it. My grandmother did not stop at denying the story my parents had built. She told me directly that my father, as the trustee, had violated the terms of the trust. More than that, she had already contacted David Brennan, the attorney who had once worked with my grandfather, and he was now investigating the entire matter. I could barely breathe as she spoke. What did that mean? It meant she had suspected the truth for years. It meant this was serious enough to involve a lawyer. And it meant I was not crazy or petty for feeling that something had always been deeply wrong. I asked her why she had not told me sooner. She was quiet for a moment, then said she had hoped my parents would correct their own wrongdoing, that they would realize what they were doing and stop before it was too late. She admitted that she had been wrong to wait so long. That hurt, but in a different way. For the first time in this whole story, an adult was willing to admit they had failed me. Then she asked me the most important question of all: "Are you ready now to stand up for yourself?" I thought about my 6 years in the military. I thought about the loans. I thought about the family group chat just hours earlier, about Madison's voice calling me the one who ruined other people's moments. And I heard myself answer, "Yes, I'm ready." That moment was not dramatic. There were no tears. No one witnessed it except me and my grandmother. But that was the moment I truly stopped being the daughter who stayed quiet and started becoming the person who would fight to get the truth back. That night, an email from attorney David Brennan landed in my inbox with the subject line, "Confidential documents regarding the Thomas family trust." I opened my laptop while Jake sat beside me, a silent source of support. The first document was the original trust agreement created before I was even born. The wording was painfully clear: when each granddaughter turned 18, she would receive $200, 000, for educational purposes, including tuition, housing, books, and related expenses. The distribution had to be equal between the beneficiaries. David had even underlined the word equal in his notes. I stared at it, feeling as if I were holding proof for every year I had been told I was selfish for wanting what was mine. The next document was the withdrawal history. Starting in the exact month I turned 18, money had begun disappearing from the trust. Little by little, the entire $400, 000, had been funneled either into accounts in Madison's name or sent directly to her school. Not a single dollar had gone to me. I sat there in silence, my hands ice cold. But the biggest shock was in the third file, an amendment to the trust created 3 months after my 18th birthday, giving the trustee the flexibility to distribute the money however he saw fit. The document bore my grandmother's signature, or at least it appeared to. Right below it, David had added a note stating that signature analysis had confirmed it was forged. I zoomed in on every stroke of ink. Even with my untrained eye, I could see the difference. Then I heard Jake say quietly, "Your father didn't just take the money. He forged her signature." And in that moment, this story crossed into something far darker. The end of David's email was cold and legal, but every word hit me like a hammer. embezzlement, breach of fiduciary duty, forgery, multiple felony charges. My phone buzzed, and a text from David appeared. The question was no longer whether I had a case, but whether I wanted to pursue it. He emphasized that the decision was mine, and that both he and my grandmother were ready to move forward if I agreed. I stared at the screen for a long time. For years, I had always told myself to just endure it and move on. But now the truth was right there, leaving no room for softer words like favoritism or unfairness. They had not simply chosen Madison. They had broken the law to do it. What hurt most in that moment was not the money, it was realizing that all the pain I had carried for 6 years had been built on a deliberate lie. My parents had let me believe without question that I was unworthy, that I did not need help, that I had no right to ask for more. They let me join the military, let me carry the burden of debt, let me turn myself into someone who could endure anything, all while knowing none of it had ever been necessary in the first place. Jake took my hand and said they had not just favored Madison, they had committed crimes in order to put her above me. That truth hurt, but it also set me free. Because if this was the truth, then for the first time I could stop asking myself whether I had been overreacting. I had not. I had been betrayed. And from that moment on, I knew I could never go back to being the one who stayed silent. The next morning, I drove to my parents' house with the stack of printed documents beside me. My father opened the door with a cup of coffee in his hand, and the smile on his face vanished the moment he saw mine. I did not waste time. I walked straight into the kitchen, dropped the papers onto the table, and told him to explain. He only had to glance at the first page before all the color drained from his face. My mother came in after hearing the commotion, and I told them plainly that I knew everything: the trust, the money that had been taken, the forged signature. My father started stammering that it was not that simple, but this time I did not let them hide behind vague words. To me it was very simple. $200, 000 was mine. $200, 000 was Madison's. And they had taken it all. My mother did not even try to deny that what they had done was wrong. She only justified it by saying Madison never would have succeeded without their full support. And in that moment, I understood exactly how they saw the world. To them, the issue was never right or wrong, it was the outcome. If Madison could soar, then the price I paid was acceptable. My father panicked and said they would pay the money back. Just please do not make this public. Do not ruin Madison's MBA graduation. When he said that, something in me turned cold. 6 years of my life had been thrown off course, and the thing they cared about most was still Madison's celebration. I picked up the documents and walked toward the door. My father called after me, his voice almost pleading. I turned back and said the one thing he probably least wanted to hear: I am not ruining anything. The truth will do that on its own. It was the first time I looked at him not as a careless father but as someone who had knowingly harmed me. 3 weeks before Madison's MBA graduation, my parents started texting me nonstop, begging me to come to the party so that the family could move past all this. I did not answer right away. Instead, I called my grandmother. When I told her they wanted me there, she almost laughed bitterly and said, "Of course they did. They wanted to control the story." Then she asked if I was going. I told her yes, but not to forgive them to witness. She said she would be there too with David. Her voice was so calm that it made me realize she had prepared far more carefully than I had understood. Jake, on the other hand, was more practical. When I told him I was going, he looked at me for a long moment and asked if I was sure I wanted to walk into that, because a public confrontation is always more intense than you expect. I told him I was not going there to cause a scene. I was simply going to show up. But we both understood the truth. With what was about to come out, my presence alone would be enough to change the air in that room. 1 week before the party, my grandmother called again and said David had uncovered even more and that he intended to speak when the right people were there to hear it. That sentence made me feel both nervous and strangely calm. In the military, I had learned that sometimes strength is not about shouting. Sometimes it is about standing still, watching, and letting other people reveal themselves in the light. That was exactly what I decided to do. I would not ruin the party. I would not argue. I would not cry. I would simply be there and watch the truth walk into that room the way it always should have. The party was held at the upscale Riverside Club, exactly the kind of place my parents loved: expensive, polished, and glamorous enough to make outsiders believe we were the picture of a perfect family. I arrived with Jake. The moment we walked in, I saw congratulatory banners for Madison and a display table filled with photos from her college journey. Sorority events, study abroad, graduation, bright smiling moments. There was not a single photo of me in uniform. My mother spotted me first and immediately came over with a strained smile, whispering that all she wanted was for me to be pleasant today and not make things uncomfortable. Madison appeared too, wearing a sleek dark blue dress, every bit the image of success, and coldly reminded me not to make the atmosphere awkward. I simply told her I had come just as they wanted. When my grandmother walked in with David the attorney in a sharp suit carrying a leather briefcase, I knew things had already started moving. My father kept glancing toward the door as if he were afraid of something. Then he picked up the microphone and began to speak. He talked about the sacrifices parents make, about difficult decisions, about how they had invested everything in Madison's future. He framed what he had done as wisdom, as vision, as faith in excellence. The room applauded. Glasses were raised. I sat there in silence, my hands clenched tightly beneath the table, listening to a man turn theft into an inspirational story. And then, at that exact moment, my grandmother stood up. The entire room fell silent. I knew the moment the truth had waited for all these years had finally arrived. My grandmother stepped forward slowly but steadily, her voice so calm that people had no choice but to fall quiet and listen. My father tried to stop her, saying this was not the right time. But she replied that after a speech about sacrifice and investment, this was exactly the right time. David began handing out documents to the key tables: Madison's professors, relatives, family, friends, and my parents' colleagues. The soft rustle of paper filled the room and the atmosphere began to shift as people started reading. My grandmother stated clearly in front of every guest that the trust she and my grandfather had established 28 years earlier was worth $400,000, divided equally between their two granddaughters, $200,000, each. She held up the document showing the words equal distribution, non-negotiable. Then she pointed at me and said that I had received the perfectly round number of 0 because I had been forced to join the military just to create my own path to an education. When Madison panicked, said that Dad had told her it was family money and that Grandma had agreed, my grandmother cut her off immediately. I never agreed. Your father forged my signature. The room seemed to explode, first into stunned silence, then into sharp gasps of shock. David followed in a cold, precise legal tone. The full $400,000 had been drained over 6 years. That was embezzlement. My parents tried to pull things into a private conversation, but my grandmother declared in front of everyone that she would press charges. The words landed in the room like a blast. People started whispering. The way they looked at my parents changed instantly. In that moment, I did not have to say a single word. I just sat there watching the polished shell of my family crack open in front of hundreds of eyes. But the shock did not end there. David revealed that during the investigation, they had uncovered yet another education fund worth $50,000 for each grandchild. And that money had been drained the same way again. Every dollar had gone to Madison's side. And it got worse. Part of the money had also been used for personal expenses, paying off credit card debt, renovating the house, funding vacations, and covering things that had absolutely nothing to do with my sister's tuition. At that point, no one in the room could dismiss it as a mere family matter anymore. This was fraud. Deception. A betrayal that had gone on for years. Madison looked at my father as if he were a stranger. In a shaken voice, she said, he had always told her it was money she deserved because of her achievements and hard work. I looked at her and said the only thing that felt fair, she had earned her degree, honestly, she had not faked her education. But the financial foundation beneath it had been built on lies. And that truth immediately began to trigger consequences. One professor said the school's ethics board needed to be informed. A hiring manager Madison knew pulled her aside for a private conversation. Friends, relatives, and neighbors began distancing themselves from my parents, as if simply standing too close might stain them. After the party, in a smaller private room, David laid out my legal options. Clearly criminal charges, civil action, full restitution, with interest, even possible prison time. I told him I did not want to destroy Madison because she had not known. But I did want back what had been stolen from me, and I wanted my parents to understand that they could not do something like this and expect life to simply move on. For the first time in my life, I did not apologize for demanding fairness. After that night, I set firm boundaries with my parents. Out in the parking lot, my mother screamed that I had destroyed the family. I told her the family had been broken by them 10 years earlier. I demanded $250,000 plus interest, including the amount from the second fund, and left David to handle everything else. A few months later, my father accepted a reduced plea: embezzlement and breach of fiduciary duty, in exchange for cooperating and agreeing to full restitution. He had to refinance the house, sell off part of his retirement assets, and repay me through a 10-year payment plan. I did not waste a single dollar. I paid off my student loans, bought a small place of my own, and used the rest to build the future I should have had from the beginning. The most meaningful part was that I created a support program for veterans transitioning back into civilian life, using the Thomas name, turning money that had once been stolen into real opportunities for other people. Madison changed too. She eventually asked to meet with me, apologized, and admitted that even though she had not known about the fraud, she had chosen not to ask questions because the arrangement benefited her. She even volunteered to contribute extra money to me each month from her own salary. Our relationship could never go back to what it once was, but for the first time it contained honesty. My father began therapy and wrote me a real apology, specific, direct, with no excuses. My mother, however, has not truly changed, so I keep my distance. And as for me, 18 months later, I finally understood something. Clearly, I was not wrong for speaking up. Sometimes, choosing self-respect is not about destroying a family. It is about saving yourself from being hurt all over again. If my story made you realize that love does not mean accepting mistreatment, then subscribe to the channel and stay with me for the next stories. And if you have ever had to stand up for yourself against unfairness within your own family, I truly want to hear your story in the comments.